Assalamu alaikum Mufti, thank you for joining us again.
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh. Good to see you again in this conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
So Mufti, in our current plight, we've seen a lot of challenges in life, and particularly, especially in this COVID period, we've seen a lot of people in our community come together and take up some of the challenges by staying united, and we were very much responsible in our actions, and Alhamdulillah, through that, we have gone through some of the difficult phases, and things are getting better, Alhamdulillah. But despite that, Mufti, talking about responsibility, some see it as a burden, while others see it as something that needs to be taken up. It's something that is important in our daily life, especially in our daily routine. How can we define responsibility?
Yeah, thank you, Ustaz Abdul Mateen. I think that's a very good point and good question, and I think something we always have to encounter in our lives. In fact, people often think that responsibility is always about somebody else, but we are first and foremost responsible to ourselves, to take care of ourselves, and to care for ourselves. This is not putting us above other people, but this is to start with our own self. So being responsible to yourself means you take care of your needs, you take care of your health, your well-being. You also perform the duties that are obligated upon you as an individual, your duties to God. That is being responsible with ourselves. If we lose this sense of responsibility, then I think obviously, we will suffer even on our own. You can think of, if you're not responsible about your own health, you start ignoring, what you should not consume, right? Whether it's food, whether it's drinks, whether it's anything else, and what happens is often you find yourself in a very, very troubled state, health-wise. So you'll be very unhealthy, right? And it's simply because you don't care about yourself enough. Now, you imagine us living with other people. Certainly, the responsibility becomes more and more important. And this is what we also taught as Muslims, that our life is always about, not just about ourselves, but also about other people. Every single thing that we do has a consequence, not just on ourselves, but on other people. And if you look at the whole range of moral teachings of Islam, actually, in fact, in all religions, and many other religious traditions, it's always about what happens to other people as a consequence of your actions. And so this is the idea of responsibility that the Prophet ﷺ also says, "Kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'iyati." Every one of you is like a shepherd. Like you take care of something. You have a responsibility. In fact, if you're a young person and you're just studying, sometimes we think you're not responsible yet for the family, but you are responsible for your studies.
Inshallah.
I often say this to my son. Many years ago when he was still in the primary school, I said, you have a job. Just because you're not working like adults go to work, I think you have a job. Your job is to go to school and do well in school. So take it seriously and make sure you do well. And I always tell him my mantra to him, and he memorized this already, and I open my mouth, the first word he knows, he will complete it. I said, I will only allow you to play hard if you work hard. You can play hard means you can spend time on your games or TV, because it's still growing up, but only if you play hard. If you work hard. So you have a job, you have a responsibility, and I think we can teach our children that from very young.
A sense of responsibility.
Yes, because it's important, right? And that is to yourself, and to other people is really about our actions have consequence. So in the COVID period, we know that when we think of transmission of virus, it happens because of two people or more. So what we do can lead, can lead to the transmission of the virus if we are not careful. And that is why social responsibility is extremely important. And I'm sure you know, and our listeners know this. So many hadith, so many verses of the Quran about not hurting other people. You know, not
La darar wala dirar.
yes, you know, so many other principles, which in essence is really about not causing harm to others. And that is being responsible. That is being responsible in the form of ensuring that none of our actions and behaviors cause hurt and harm to others. So there is a very powerful hadith from the Prophet in Sahih Al-Bukhari and Muslim, in Riyadus Salihin. The Prophet actually says, you know, he doesn't like this culture of, you know, people gathering on the streets and, you know, chit-chatting, you know. So and he had a reason for that. So he says, "Iyyakum wal julus fi turuqat." Don't gather in the, you know, in the streets and pathways, and, you know, sometimes you sit there and you spend hours talking. But the companions then said, you know, Ya Rasulullah, we don't have a choice. We don't have elsewhere to sit and speak. That is our majalis. So the Prophet said, if you don't have any other choice but to sit there, okay, but make sure that you give that pathway, that road, its right. So give the road the right. What is the right of the road? The Prophet says, first is غض البصر وكف الأذى ورد السلام والأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر. So غض البصر, just because you're there, don't go and people watch. Is it call it like you know, you just watch people and you know, there are some very bad subcultures of, you know, men gathering and looking at women and, you know, and start making all this insinuations and some even, you know, tantamount to harassment, and all these things is totally unacceptable. So Ghaddul Basar, you don't even look, don't keep looking at people. You need to sit there with your friends and have a conversation, fine. But don't go and start, you know, looking at the wrong things.
Keep our gaze.
Lower your gaze. Ghaddul Basar. Wa kaful adha, do not harm. Do not harm people. So you must make sure that, you know, your sitting there does not cause any harm to others. Waraddu salam, reply to a salam if someone's, you know, offers you a greeting and salam. Wal amru bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. So ask people to do good and prevent people from doing evil and bad. So, you know, this is the kind of responsibility in Islam. Every place, every situation, every moment has its right, and our duty is to protect that right and uphold that right, and that is responsibility. And if we understand it that way, we understand why it's so central to our religious identity and teaching, because I am sure none of us want to live in a society or in a family or anywhere where you're surrounded by irresponsible people. Because you know what happens if you are surrounded by irresponsible people. You cannot trust anyone. You know you're exposed to harm and danger anytime, and we don't want that, right? So obviously it's a very important thing.
And part of having a responsible way of life is to make responsible decisions as well. What are the things that we can consider before making an important decision? How do we make important decisions?
Decision making, I think, is part of our life. Every time we have to make decisions, from, you know, as simple as what to wear this morning, which road to drive, which, you know, and then, you know, like we discussed in previous episodes, which tea to drink, which tea to make, to order, and it goes on to very important, difficult ones, life choices, you know, choices in life, choosing a partner, choosing a spouse. You know, schools for children, education. Some people even think about, you know, where to live, whether it's town, cities, or even countries, and also important decisions as leaders. So life is all about decision making. I think it can be overwhelming if you have to. You know, I personally have felt a few times that it becomes too overwhelming to make so many decisions in such a short period of time. So I think, yes, it is a tough thing, and it's good that it's tough, because then you are thinking about the right decisions. If it's too easy, then it means that you just don't care. You know, not fussy enough, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to be fussy all the time.
Yeah.
But if you're not fussy at all, then some of the decisions may not be very good. I do spend a lot of time before I make any decisions. My wife will tell you this. You know, I do spend a lot, and I can change if the information that I get changes, as long as that decision finally has not been implemented. Because I think as long as there is still that window to reconsider, I will reconsider, because ultimately I want to know that the decision that is made is the best decision possible by a human being. You know, of course, we ask Allah for guidance. You need to have the right information. That's very, very important. You need to also, where appropriate, depending on the context, of course, consult people and the right people. But I used to think like this, you know, Ustaz Mateen, when you do not have principles for yourself, and you're not sure what your principles are, you are in a slightly dangerous position, because sometimes in those kind of circumstances, other people can decide for you. So I give a very simple example, right? You want to have breakfast or lunch or dinner outside, right?
Yeah.
So with colleagues, nowadays it's a bit difficult because of COVID, but in the past we go out. We haven't made up your mind, and you don't have an idea. It's a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah.
What usually happens is, yes, ultimately you decide, okay lah, I'll buy this for lunch. You know, if you go to a food court, the choices are even more diverse because different stalls, different types. But sometimes in those kind of situations, we go by recommendations.
Yeah.
Right? And it depends on who can convince you best. So if you have a colleague who's a very good salesperson and can tell you, oh, this food is really nice, you should try. Because you came in with a blank sheet, there's a very high chance that you will go with that recommendation. But if you came in and you know what you eat and you know what you like to eat, although your friends may recommend and suggest, or even sometimes if you go to a restaurant, the waiter can suggest and recommend, but you have some idea, you have some preferences, you have some principles, you do not necessarily change your mind that easily.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same thing with decision making. And here we're talking about influence from other people as well.
Yeah.
The question of why some people are easily influenced and some others are not, I think is partly because those who are not easily influenced, they have thought through for themselves. So they're quite clear, not that they know the answers all the time, not that they know exactly what they want to do, but they have some kind of mental framework.
Yeah, some forms of principles that they adhere to.
Yeah, so for example, when we talk about food, I prefer the healthier one. So when someone recommends something but which is very unhealthy, you will say, sorry, that's fine. I don't want to eat that, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't have those guiding principles, anything that's recommended you will take. So I think it's in the same way that making decisions are very tough, but I think our conscience must be very clear, whether as an individual, a decision for yourself, a decision for your family, for your children, for your as a leader, all those decisions, I think, if your conscience is very clear why you're doing it, I think it's a matter of getting the right information, advice by the right people, listening to others, and you can make a good decision. And you see the beauty of this, as a Muslim in particular, we know of the virtue of ijtihad. Ijtihad is, of course, it's used a lot in Islamic jurisprudence and Sharia as a tool to come up with new hukum, where there are new issues or new contexts and so on. But ijtihad, from a literal sense, literal meaning is to work very hard, to exercise your mind, to exhaust your mind. That means you must think really hard, right? But then there is a recognition that even after exercising your mind and exhausting your mental faculty and think so hard and discuss with so many people, even after that, you might still not be correct. You might still not be right. And that is why the Prophet ﷺ says, إِذَا اجْتَهَدَ الْحَاكِمْ فَأَصَابَ فَلَهُ أَجْرًا وَإِنِ اجْتَهَدَ فَأَخْطَأَ falahu ajrun wahid. So you exercise your brain, exercise your mind, you think of the right decision, fa'asab, and you got it right.
Yeah.
2 rewards. But if you didn't get it right, fa'akhta, falahu ajrun, you get 1. It is. I think it's also a metaphor to say that it's not literal sense of 2 and 1. I think it's more like, if you have put in all the effort and you get it right, then your rewards are bigger because you get to solve the problem.
And you also arrived at the proper conclusion.
Exactly, and it benefits people, right?
Yeah.
But you tried, but you didn't get it right. You are rewarded for the effort.
Yeah.
Right? But you also learn from the mistakes. So I think that is why we need to put in everything necessary in order for us to get the right decision for ourselves. But if we don't, it's fine. But at least we have gone through the process. The process is equally important as the outcome.
MashaAllah. Thank you so much for sharing us with that. Now that you mentioned it, I've been thinking about what kind of food to eat. But I guess I'll pick the one that's healthier, inshallah. So regarding responsibility, we discussed about having responsibility, a good sense of responsibility in our lives, and also the importance and the virtue of making decisions by exhausting our mental, by thinking about it properly, using the right effort and so on. Today in this, today we have a lot of, a lot of us use our social media quite a lot, and I guess at some point, it's a new world by itself. It's a virtual world. Can you share with us how can we actually cultivate a good sense of, or to practice responsibility in this virtual world of social media?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point because social media has been around, but of course different sort of different types and
different
platforms.
types, yeah.
They keep renewing and evolving, and new ones come up. But social media has been around for a while. I think what is sad is that a lot of us still treat social media not as seriously as we do with real life. So it's as if that when we speak on social media, we're not speaking to real people, just because you remove that physicality, right? And you know that, for example, if you say the wrong things in real life, that other person, if they get hurt or they get offended by what you say, you know that there are real repercussions.
Yeah.
They can hit you back, for example, if you're really, really rude and nasty in your comments. But in social media, and they call it keyboard warriors because you hide behind your keyboard. Sometimes it's all fake accounts or fake profiles, or even there's nothing much. People don't know who you are, and so people treat it differently. But whoever you are saying what you're saying to is a real person, right? Whatever background and so on, but it's a real person behind it. I mean, sometimes it may not be. We hear of bots and AIs and so on, but in most cases these are real persons. And I think there are many incidents of people really getting offended by what people say and people getting hurt.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So I think that is one problem we have, where social media as a platform still hasn't given that sense of reality in terms of or realness, in terms of communication. It's almost like you are saying something to a machine and the machine doesn't respond, or machine can't respond in a normal way, which is absolutely not the case. So that's one thing that we really need to sort of remind ourselves. And second thing is, once we know that there are real people behind it, I think the ethics in Islam in particular apply even with social media, and in fact more so with social media, because there are risk of us not treating others on social media like real individuals. And I think here, I would really encourage our listeners and Muslims to refer to Surah Al-Hujurat, because I think Surah Al-Hujurat, known by many Mufassirun as Surah Al-Adab, or ethics and morality, starts with the adab with the Prophet ﷺ, that we should not put ourselves before the Prophet in terms of priority, and do not call him from behind the wall. So it's like someone shouting for the Prophet.
Calling out.
Calling out the Prophet's name from afar. So that's showing disrespect.
Yeah.
But it goes on to talk about so many other things, like even having presumptions of other people. In about the dhanni ithmun, if you start thinking about, you think negatively, have a negative perception of a person, that could be wrong, and therefore don't have those perceptions. And then you reach a very powerful verse about the way we interact with people, and this applies especially, I think, in our case today with social media. La yaskhar qawmun min qawmin, right? One group should not denigrate or mock, sukhriya, to mock, to ridicule, to make fun of min qawmin, another group. And the verse says the reason is because asa an yakunu khayran minhum, because who you're mocking, who you're making fun of,
probably better
than you.
Yeah.
How do you know you're better than them? Why do you look down on them? Wala nisa'un min nisa'in asa an yakunna khayran minhunna. Same thing with women. One group shall not mock the other, make fun of the other group, because again, only God knows who's better, and that's the rationale. But the teaching is not to make fun, not to mock, and it also goes on to say, do not call people by names, like names which insult them and so on. So one of the problems you often see with social media, the lack of responsibility, is in making comments that hurt people on the basis of race, religion, language, background, all sorts of things. And at the end of the day, and we know that, for example, in most of these cases, even the allegations or the issues that people bring up are not true. When you say, certain people are certain kind, and you make fun of them, sometimes it's not true, even not true. I mean, so one is it's a false accusation. You are telling a lie of some sort, or you're fabricating, something which is not true. The other is you hurt those people. So I think, we as human beings, I think we really need to examine ourselves again, and are we really okay with this kind of virtual culture, if you like, where it's okay to, in fact, there's the real thing about bullying online, right? People do bully other people, even with the physical nature, like even fat shaming and all these kind of things. We need to learn to leave people alone.
Give them space.
Yes, I mean, respect people's space, and deal with people responsibly, because I think it speaks badly of a human civilization that has gone into the digital era, technology, but display the lowest civilizational value of disrespect. Like, you can't even respect other people. So I hope we don't become a sort of a superficial human civilization where technology is great, platforms are wonderful, everything looks advanced, but our soul and our spirituality is so backward. And a lot of disrespect. So I think that is something we really need to look at ourselves. It's a long way, I think. There's a lot more to sort of remind ourselves and society, but again, if you understand responsibility, you understand respect, you understand respecting people's space, and also the evils of hurting people and hurting their soul and their mentality, then I think things can become better.
Thank you again, Mufti. And those are very impactful words of advice that I believe the listeners and me as well, that I believe we can learn and ponder upon it, and reflect on our social media usage, from taking up responsibility as part of our lives, and to make important decisions as we move along, and learn from one another, and talk about social media as being a platform for us to come together, although virtually. I believe, as I've mentioned, it entails some forms of responsibility as well. Thank you so much, Mufti, for sharing with us those very important words of advice. And with that, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.